Nocn vLearn launches to all Nocn Group centres for programmes, qualifications and bespoke accreditation. vLearn is a custom-branded, easy-to-use virtual learning environment to empower your tutors and learners by utilising the most cutting-edge technology, including a learning management system, digital content, artificial intelligence and chatbots. The following topics will be the first to launch: tutor support for qualifications and bespoke accreditation, assessment materials and mock examination content, hundreds of ready-to-go digital learning courses. vLearn provides all of the features you need in one place. All of this for only £20 per month per centre, learner fee for only £2 per learner per month. Contact your Nocn Group account manager at business-inquiries@nocn.org.uk to become a part of the vLearn experience. Nocn vLearn.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. I trust that you can hear me and now see me. So you have a questions box. My name is Nick Linford. I will be doing a little intro before we go to our round table. But before we do any of that, it'll be great to just hear a little bit from you. Use your questions box, type in there. That will be the way that we communicate with each other. No one else can see what you are typing into that box apart from me, so it will be anonymous. So let me know how you're doing. What's the weather doing? It's very sunny in southeast London. Let me know that you can see and hear me. Hi Tracy, a sunny day in Gloucester. Good to hear from you. So we have close to 1,000 of you on the line, so it'd be great to make sure that we can see and hear all of you. Hi James, hi Primrose, hi Sarah, hi Hayley, fantastic. Morning everyone, great to have you there. Sunny in Portsmouth, says Paul. It sounds like it's pretty sunny everywhere, which is lovely. What are we doing indoors, eh? We are doing a very important webcast, all about the Effie white paper. So I trust you're in the right place. Fantastic. It looks like you've all figured out where the questions box is, and I'm getting an absolute deluge of, oh no, damp and dull up north. That's not good. Lovely in Liverpool. Jill's already figured out the old alliterative weather. It's not so much forecast as status, I suppose. Fantastic. So we're just making sure that the technology is working great, which it is. I'll remind you again of this in a little bit, but this is being recorded. So we will be sending this out after the session this morning, which will finish at midday today. Great to have so many of you on the line, and been very popular webcast approach to the white paper already. This is the second. I'll come on and explain this a bit more in some detail, but this is the second of what will be a series of 6 webcasts in partnership with our friends over at Nocn Group. So this is the order of play. I trust that you can see the agenda. As it says at the top right, a link to the recording of this session will be emailed shortly after this live event. So the plan of play, the order of ceremonies will be, I will be doing around about half an hour overview of, in this case, chapter 1 in the 5-chapter Effie white paper. Then very much looking forward to hearing the view from our webcast partner, Graham Hastings Evans, the Chief Executive at Nocn Group. And then we will be going to the round table. Delighted to be joined, as you can see on the screen, by Jennifer Coupland, the Chief Executive at the Institute for Apprenticeships, Technical Education. Also Emma Roberts, Head of Research, WorldSkills UK, and Paul Allman, Director at Flannery Plant Hire. So more on them later once I've worked my way through chapter 1 with you. We've spent the last 3 or 4 minutes just making sure that you can see and hear me, which it appears to be working well, which is great. So without further ado, let's have a little look at the Effie white paper. So just a reminder, I'll probably do these couple of slides at the start of each webcast before we really get into the detail. But if you did miss this last week, just a reminder, it is a very, very wide-ranging white paper. And you know how I like my numbers. So here we have just a brief summary of the white paper in numbers, as it were. Not too many pounds and pence in there that we didn't know about. I'll come on to that later, particularly around chapter 1. But in terms of some of the scale, of course, the word counts are always important. But as I say, we've got 6 chapters to do the summary. We're looking essentially at chapter 1, technically, although that comes after the summary, which we did last week. Lots of sections within those chapters, lots of what the department is referring to as policy decisions in this document across many, many pages, paragraphs, words, characters, and so on. Very wide ranging. So this is the kind of, for me, the key paragraph from the Education Secretary, and I'm increasingly of the view that this is the reason why it's a white paper. We spoke with Keith Smith, the Director of Policy for post-16 at the department last week about this, and I'm increasingly of the view that the reason why this is a white paper is specifically to strengthen these links between employers, and it refers here to further education providers, although the more you read the document, the more you realise that I think that this is really very much about colleges, I believe. So it's very much, although the wording says here strengthening the link between employers and further education providers, I think this is really very much about a new approach to strengthening these links between colleges and employers. And this new approach, and the reason why it's a white paper, I think, is because it's going to require legislation. The government are basically fed up of trying to persuade, cajole, incentivize both employers and colleges to work together. They're not doing it enough, apparently. And so we are likely to have, in the not too distant future, depending on parliamentary business, which is obviously challenging at the moment in terms of the impact of the both pandemic and other matters. But we're very much expecting an Effie bill off the back of this white paper. And that's what we were talking about last week to some extent, why it was a white paper. Some of you may have tuned in or read about this in Effie Week. A white paper comes before legislation. It's something that the whole of government and all government departments kind of sign off on, so that it can then be included in the kind of legislative agenda. So this is the one to really keep an eye on in terms of implications of what happens next. So there are, as I say, 5, after the summary, 5 Effie white paper chapters, and we're going to focus, or I'm going to focus now, and then with our roundtable, going to focus on the first chapter here, putting employers at the heart of post-16 skills. This is what we'll be covering today, following 4 chapters the remaining weeks. And I, just to repeat myself, I really genuinely think that this is the key chapter that we'll be talking about this morning. This, for me, is the reason why there's a white paper. Everything else could have been just policy announcements. The white paper is not a consultation. We'll have some of those soon, such as consulting around the way the new National Skills Fund will be administered. We already have multiple consultations running at the moment around qualifications reform. I think we've certainly had at least 2 consultations on reforming, for example, apprenticeship rates. We'll talk with Chief Executive of the Institute of Apprenticeships, I suspect maybe a bit about that later, which gets a mention in here. But for me, the key chapter is chapter 1, and just to repeat myself, I believe the reason why we have this white paper, which will then precede legislation. So here is chapter 1, and I'm going to now sort of essentially try and sell you my thinking around why this is very much about colleges and very much about chapter 1, very much about the first part of the chapter, if anything, really. It's very much the first 2 sections within this chapter. So we're going to just walk our way through these sections within chapter 1. So let's start with the tailored plan to meet local skills needs. This, for me, is, if we're really going to kind of boil it down to the key feature, the key reason for a white paper, this for me is the key reason. So the government's solution, essentially, to an age-old problem of employer ownership, employer-led, are colleges engaging, who owns what, the key solution seems to be to introduce something called a local skills improvement plan, or a LISP, as I'm calling it, which they say will provide a framework to help colleges and other providers reshape what they offer to tackle skills matches and ensure that they're responding as effectively as possible to labour market skills needs. Now, these slides you will be receiving along with the recording, so don't worry too much about screenshotting or taking lots of notes. So this local skills improvement plan, very key and at the heart for me of why we have a white paper, which I'll come on to in a moment in terms of legislation. But let's just find out a little bit more about the local skills improvement plan. So what are they trying to do? Well, one of the things they're trying to do, and it's very much, I think, a central reason, is they're trying to do what they refer to as drive more efficient provision. So what do they mean by efficient provision? Well, they go on and talk a bit about this, and you'll see on the next slide. But basically what they're looking to do is to avoid duplication, but perhaps more significantly, avoid spending public money on courses which don't lead to jobs or don't fill important skills gaps. And I think this very much links to what to criticisms that has been made, for example, by Amanda Spielman, the chief inspector, where she said to basically, for example, she said quite publicly that some colleges run lots of level 3, for example, level 3 arts and drama courses or performing arts courses that don't go anywhere in terms of related jobs. Now, we can have a debate about whether that's important or not, but there's very much, I think, the thread that's running through this tailored plan is very much to find those linkages and avoid paying for courses where those linkages aren't there. And the government has tried various strategies to make that happen. They've tinkered a bit with some data around progression, but hasn't really gone very far. They've Ofsted have kind of tried a bit through inspection to talk more about destinations and so on, but it's not really had the teeth. And these local skills improvement plans, whilst on the one hand may look a little bit like some things we've seen in the past, I certainly remember things like the strategic area reviews going back to 2009 with the local learning and skills councils. But actually, it looks like this will come with teeth through legislation, which we'll come on to. So they talk about efficient provision. I think this is another way of describing this, is kind of streamlining the use of public money so it's best used to avoid duplication, but also to only run those courses, to only pay for those courses that will have the biggest impact in terms of the economy. They say that the plans, these LIPs, will be for an initial period of 3 years, and they'll be reviewed and updated regularly. They want to get the chambers of commerce involved. The government, they've been looking at models in Germany, although it doesn't look, I think they've realized that they can't go down the full German model for a variety of different reasons. But as always, the Secretary of State is keen on comparing us to what happens in Germany. And they've hit on the chambers of commerce, who they say already work closely with providers, apparently. Some, sure, don't think it's widespread, and are highly responsive to local businesses and are well placed to represent the needs of local businesses. They say that in early 2021, so that's anytime now, they'll announce a group of trailblazer local areas using the accredited chambers of commerce. And this is the key bit where you need to link, and I've put it in orange, you need to link the LISP with the legislation. It's a throwaway line arguably within the white paper that I've put here. It doesn't really get any other mention than this, but it's, for me, it boils down to absolutely the key reason for the white paper. It is our intention to legislate to put the employer leadership of local skills improvement plans on a statutory footing. So we asked the author last week, or I asked, what that meant in practical terms, and it took a fair bit of coaxing out of Keith Smith to be absolutely clear what's being talked about here. Why legislate? What do we mean by putting LISPs on a statutory footing? And what he confirmed last week, and we reported in Effie Week, is that the law, through an Effie bill, there'll be new primary legislation, and there'll be a chapter in there about the creation of local skills improvement plans, and then there'll be another chapter about intervention and the powers as it's referred to in the white paper, the powers of the Secretary of State to intervene where colleges in particular do not follow the local skills improvement plan which has essentially been written by these employer bodies, although in theory in partnership with the institutions in terms mainly of the colleges. So for me, again, I'm sorry to labour the point, for me this is the point about the white paper. The other 100 odd pages or so is really summarising mostly policies we already have in place or policies that were already being worked on, and adding in some places a little bit of detail, and in other places very, very long, far away deadlines for things. But this for me is what we're rushing towards. We're rushing towards legislation for the first time to essentially enable the Education Secretary to use powers of intervention where colleges don't do what they're told. So moving into the next section within the same chapter, headed Investing in Local Skills Priorities. So what does that look like? So again, there's a sentence here. These plans will, quote, identify where provision could be delivered more efficiently by working in partnership with others. So what's the carrot here? If the stick is intervention because of the new legislation, if colleges don't get involved, then the carrot here is new money through something called a Strategic Development Fund, or as what I've referred to as an SDF, money for both capital and for revenue to facilitate changes to provision that have been endorsed by local employers. So local employers, maybe chambers of commerce, they come up with this plan and say it's going to need X tens of millions, this is how we'd like it to be spent, and that'll be funded through the Strategic Development Fund. And very much, if you wanted to be fairly blunt about it, very much a bribe, as it were, to colleges in particular to say, you know, get on board now, here's the money, governing body, absolutely, you know, why wouldn't you go after this money, get on board, work with the employers, and hopefully we'll never need to use the intervention powers. So some new money, we'll find out more about in due course, routed through a new fund known as the Strategic Development Fund. So what does it say? What more detail do we have from the white paper about this Strategic Development Fund? So they say they're going to pilot it in a number of areas. I presume it will be in the same areas that we saw in the previous section of the chapter, where we have these already accredited chambers of commerce, new areas of the country, and we anticipate inviting bids, hurrah, more tendering, for funding from groups of colleges. Again, this is where you see the point. Forget further education providers in the intro from Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State. This is very much about colleges. So I'm quoting from the document, this will be a strategic development fund available, we presume, only to colleges and I quote, for the trailblazer local areas and colleges to apply for funding to support the priorities identified as they work with chambers and other business representative organisations to develop their local skills improvement plans. In other areas, colleges will need to demonstrate that they've worked with representative employer organisations and received endorsement for their bids. Further information will be announced shortly. Oh, let's go back a bit there. So this slide, sort of second bit of the chapter, very much putting a bit of meat on what the kind of early incentive would be, and this time specifically to colleges in the form of cash, to get on board with the employer-led body, whichever that happens to be. We think chambers of commerce, but in fact, every week we've been speaking to the chambers of commerce, and they seem a little bit blindsided by what's going on, and I think are still in negotiations with the government about exactly what they're being expected to do and how they might do it with the limited resources that they have available to them. So then we move into the sort of the second half of this particular chapter, chapter 1, and we're now very much in the kind of same old realms. We're now moving away from the new legislation. We're now moving away from the money that will incentivize colleges in particular to get on board before potentially the Secretary of State would need to use the new powers. Very much more into the kind of same old in terms of policy, but certainly worth a mention here. So they then talk about the Skills and Productivity Board. This is in fact a board that Gavin Williamson announced that he was going to create almost 2 years ago at the Conservative Party conference, when he said that we were going to be better than Germany for our skills provision in a decade. So he said he would create a skills and productivity board. That took just over a year to come to fruition. I'm not entirely sure whether they've met yet. I suspect they possibly have met now. The members of the board were announced a month or so ago. And as you can see, one of the members, Stephen Van Rooyen, who is the Chief Executive of Sky UK in Europe, got a name check within the document, which is fairly unusual for an individual to get named within a white paper. But anyway, I was quite surprised at that. And the Education Secretary will use this board as evidence to inform policy decisions. It's quite an unusual setup. The board are nearly all very experienced economists. We have Keep on the board, who is a very well-known researcher in the Effie and skills space. And what's interesting about this particular board is that they're all handsomely paid as well. So the idea is this will be a very sort of professional board of very experienced economists providing authoritative advice when it comes to where the skills gaps are, and looking to use this evidence to support the local skills improvement plans. Be interesting to see how that plays out over time. I've always had my doubts about the use of labour market information for planning courses that will start in a couple of years and not finish for maybe 5 or 6 years, and whether the labour market will be anything like the analysis that had been done maybe up to a decade before. But anyway, this is the thinking, is that there'll be this board. They may well have already met once or twice. So then we move into another section within the chapter about the qualifications themselves being employer-led standards, very much trying to build on the reforms, the ongoing reforms in many areas of Effie and skills, not just apprenticeships. If you consider other reform programs that we've had in the past, such as not just the Richard Review for apprenticeships, but who remembers the Whitehead Review for qualifications and trying to link to employers. So we've been here before many times with trying to get employers involved in the designer qualifications, but we're in a new world now where we have an Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education and various employer groups, trailblazer employer groups as they were known under the apprenticeship reforms, and route panels and so on for T levels. And so very much expanding on that model and concept for levels 2 and 3 and or up to level 3, and the higher technical education qualifications at level 4 and 5. So this is a much more of a longer burn over a much longer period of time. As you can see, it does say the majority by 2030, so that could just be 51%. Doesn't mean that it's the vast majority. We're not really sure exactly how this will roll out, but clearly it will be important that if there's a greater role to be played here outside of T levels and apprenticeships for the Institute for Apprenticeship and Technical Education, that they're working closely with Ofqual and with the Office for Students for the Higher Education Provision, something that the white paper does talk about. And I'm keen to chat to the Chief Executive of the Institute for Apprenticeship and Technical Education shortly on this webcast about that role that they'll play working with Ofqual and OFS to go through what is a cyclical round, as we always do, of qualification reforms, what that might look like. But again, for me, this is all a bit of, for me, this is all a bit of a sideshow. We don't need a white paper, I don't think, to do some of these things, but we will need it for the legislation to put the skills plans into a statutory footing, such that the Secretary of State can actually use intervention powers where it's felt that the colleges in particular are not following them. What that looks in practical terms, well, as Keith Smith said last week, that'll be for the ministers to determine in drafting and drawing up the bill itself, and then that will then be debated in Parliament and may well be amended many times in both houses. Then there's a chapter specifically on apprenticeships. Nothing really stand out in here that we didn't really already know, or that we didn't know they were already working on. So we will continue with the 95% subsidy. where the employer hasn't got any of their levy left or didn't have any at all. That's a huge subsidy, and I'm amazed that that's being maintained at that level. I noticed that the government have just announced some new funding for leadership being routed through the Treasury and the I think it's the Department for the Bays, the Department for Innovation, which is subsidised at 90% rather than 95%. So incredibly generous at 95%, much more generous than boot camps at 70%. So that's staying. Enhancements to the levy transfer policy, but that's still capped at 25%, which is really the only important thing, really, when it comes to levy transfers. So that's not really changing much. They're looking at a slightly more flexible model, which is an expansion of an existing model within the film and industry sector, supported at the moment by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. So that's going to be expanded very slightly, very little money set aside for that. It's not quite sure how that will play out, but one to keep an eye on. They're only talking about construction creative. And this is a third model sitting alongside the current models that have been rather neglected, the group training agency and the apprenticeship training agency models. So this is a third kind of hybrid model that we've written about. If you're interested in Effie Week, we've done a long feature this week on the plans for these flexi apprenticeships, where you would have an employer that's an agency, but then the agency would essentially rent out the apprentice to multiple other employers on a project basis. So they might do 3 months and then move on to the next employer and do 5 months and move on and so on. So they can still get to their minimum duration of a year. So it's being called a flexi apprenticeship. I would arguably call it more a kind of short project-based apprenticeship, because that's the problem to which this is a solution, the minimum duration problem. Then there's talk about front-loaded training, again in some areas priority construction standards, apparently from 2021, but I'm not clear what that means in practical terms. Assuming that they are actually employed from the beginning, you can already front-load the training, so it doesn't look like anything particularly new to me. Then you've got talking about improving transition to apprenticeships. Again, nothing that we haven't been trying or been doing for some time, and they just randomly throw in that how we can better improve transitions from the boot camps that are kind of just getting off the ground at the moment. Because I suspect someone thought, oh yeah, how do we, well, have we thought about that? We should probably be thinking about that. Then we've got the working with the Institute for Apprenticeship Technical Education to, quote, prioritise the development and delivery of standards that will have the greatest positive impact, which is something you would have thought would have been a priority from the beginning of the reforms. But I think initially for many years, it was a first come, first service when it was around the development of apprenticeships, as opposed to which are going to be the most popular or which are going to be the most economically important. So we might see a slight change in emphasis here around development and redevelopment. And we've got COVID thrown in. So we've seen some of the reforms focus specifically on where it can make a positive impact in light of COVID, such as the apprenticeship register, where you can technically still get on it at the moment if what you want to do could support the COVID effort. And as I've already mentioned, the Institute gets a name check for this purpose in the white paper. Again, nothing we didn't already know. We'll be introducing a new funding model, a new improved funding band model, the way that they set the funding bands for current and future standards at some point this year after pilot, and we can perhaps catch up with, as I say, the chief executive, who we'll be hearing from shortly for the Institute about this. And then we get this brilliant one, to find what a high quality apprenticeship program looks like, which I thought we'd attempted to do several times, but clearly we haven't succeeded, as many people have pointed out. So we'll have another go at doing that. But yeah, the Apprenticeships chapter is quite lengthy, but doesn't really serve any purpose other than to pull together existing things that are already taking place. And we've got traineeships. Again, doesn't tell us anything we didn't already know. There was a series of reforms back last year off the back of COVID, when the Treasury said to every department, what could you do more of and more flexibly potentially to support the COVID effort, and additional funds went in to ramp up the numbers of traineeships, attempting to triple them this year, which is a huge ask under the circumstances, and not helped by the ESFA taking a very long time to get their tender in play. So no surprises here. You know all of this already. Traineeship reforms that have already been enacted are in play at the moment. And again, English, maths, and digital skills for everyone is the final section in this chapter. And again, nothing you don't already know, nothing that hasn't already been implemented. This new digital skills qualifications, they've already been launched from pretty much from the start of this academic year. What does that mean to reform and update the digital entitlements? It's not entirely clear, nor is it clear how the skills toolkit fits in here, which are the web page that the DfE has set up with links to online content which is freely available to everyone around the world. So it's not entirely sure what, if anything, is new here or what they mean by a reform and update to digital entitlement. So that's kind of it for the first chapter. Well, no, actually, finally, just last. Strangely, they've left this one. Apologies. This one is the last bit, which I would have thought should probably have come after the first two sections of this chapter, which is why I forgot it was here. So then they're going to also encourage specifically colleges. So again, a bit more money, a bit more of a bribe, perhaps, to have these college business centres to ensure, again, that they are really properly financially signed up to the local skills improvement plans through the Strategic Development Fund. So this Strategic Development Fund also being used to kind of accredit college business centres and give them money, which sounds to me very much like a ribbon-cutting moment for the ministers in terms of the use of the capital funding and probably plaques. And if you remember, plaques for things like beacon status and so on in the past. So you get the feeling that the Strategic Development Fund will be the cash bribe to get colleges on board with employer-led concepts and the skills improvement plans. That's my reading of it. If that fails, then there'll be the new legislation could lead to powers of intervention. The bit that I don't really understand is where national providers and those providers that aren't colleges, such as the private training providers, really fit in this system. I'm not clear how that's really in practice, how that would actually really work with these local skills improvement plans. So that's all to play for those in the sector with an interest. Okay, we're going to if we've time, we're certainly going to tackle comments and questions with the round table. But before then, delighted to say that we're going to be joined now by Graham Hastings Evans. Graham is the Chief Executive for Nocn Group, and very pleased to say that he is the Nocn Group is also the partner organisation for these webcasts. Graham, are you on? You're on the line. I think we can see you. I well. Am. Excellent. So I'm just going to stop my screen. So hopefully everyone should still see you. And over to you, Graham.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everybody. As you know, Nocn is an awarding body, an EPAO, an AVA, and issue smart cards. And prior to joining Nocn, just over 10 years ago now, I worked on the employer side on workforce development and also run training operations. So I think I've seen the world of skills develop from lots of different angles. The white paper builds upon the reforms that kicked off in 2011 and over the changes there was in apprenticeships, which started with the Trailblazers 2013, and then, as Nick has laid out, a whole stack of reforms since then. There are some good ideas, I think, in the white paper, but the devil is in the detail, as always. And today, we're focusing on putting the employers at the heart of the skills system. Nick's done a great intro, and we've got a very good panel with us. I'm going to pull on a few things that perhaps are a different view or other issues that Nick hasn't particularly picked on. Industrial strategies, productivity, standards, skills development, and yes, the link down to the local skills improvement plans, chambers of commerce, who I've done a lot of work with over the years, and the college business centres, and quite a lot of colleges have got this sort of thing already, but we'll touch on it. I think as a result of the pandemic, structural change is speeding up across industry. It was happening anyway, it's really sped up. In any time of massive change, then that's what happens. And we see the front face of retail becoming a white van more than a high street shop. And as time goes on, more and more of the new homes we're going to live in will be arriving on a flat pack on a lorry, as they do in Northern Europe and have done for the last about 40 or 50 years. So in 2017, the government, through the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BIS, developed an overarching UK economic industrial strategy. And from this has flowed a number of specific sector strategies. And each of those strategies includes a skills development plan. These industrial strategies set out the fundamental impact, the structural change, the digitization, artificial intelligence, changes to materials, new ways of working, green technologies will all have on sectors. And from that, all of that, we start to see the significant changes that are needed in the skills in the UK workforce. And I don't just mean the 16 to 19-year-olds doing traineeships and apprenticeships and qualifications and D-levels. I mean the 33 million in the workforce, virtually all of whom will need some form of reskilling over the next, five or so years. So that's a big task. What I'm not clear about, therefore, is how the findings of the BIS industrial strategies fit in with what's in the white paper. Can't see that joined up coherence yet. As well as my job in NOCN, I'm a fellow of the World Confederation of Productivity Sciences. And in my experience, productivity improvements are achieved through a series of very practical day-to-day changes. So again, I cannot readily work out how the almost academic research-based skills and productivity board relates to practically focused industrial strategies developed by BIS, and how this is meant to connect down at the local level with the chambers and the colleges into these local improvement plans. Now, I appreciate these are early days, so perhaps there's a lot more work needed on these aspects. To improve productivity, in my experience, requires skills development and workforce upskilling for employability, digital, AI skills, English, maths, they're all mentioned in the white paper, technical skills, and the new and green technologies, as well as critical improvements in management right the way through industry. And if we could go into design local skills plans, we need to cover all of these aspects and be consistent with the structural requirements that are in those BIS sector-based industrial strategies. Turning to occupational standards, many employers are reporting significant improvements as a result of the introduction in the new apprenticeship standards. They've been a good initiative in many areas. The next step must be developing these with the employers to match the ongoing requirements of those digital industrial strategies, because change is now happening rapidly, more rapidly than probably thought of in 2013. We must have greater flexibility in terms of the local requirements. We must have the ability to change and swap out components and update them as quickly as we can. I like the idea of the local skills improvement plans as a concept. What I'm nervous about is that these become prescribed from the centre, and when you talk about legislation and intervention, you start to get all those concerns. These plans must be owned locally. They must be achievable and practical, not doorsteps, and they've got to not play back a message to the centre, but they've got to achieve some genuine improvements. Now, whilst wanting employers at the heart, and I would feel that I come from the employer background, we've got to understand the challenges of actually getting employers on board. There is a lot of employer engagement with colleges and the chambers of commerce. However, we've got to recognise employers' main focus is running their business, not running the technical education system. So we need to engage them in a way that gets the best out of that dialogue and uses their time and efficiently. In respect to the suggestion on accredited chambers of commerce, I have my doubts, having worked with large numbers of chambers over the years. I'm worried that taking the German approach and trying to bolt it onto ours won't actually work very well. And we've got to face some facts. We don't currently have a fair and equitable spread of funding and powers in this country. Combined authorities have considerable powers and resources for skills development, while LEPs and chambers they don't. And in a way, we've almost got a postcode lottery on the access to skills funding development. So I think the first thing that we should be tackling in this white paper is how do we give that equity of funding across the country. So finally, I feel that it's right that what employers need and want drives productivity, drives an equitable economy. It's got to be at the heart of the skills system, but also at the heart of this skills system, we need the other major stakeholders like the training providers, the assessment organisations, and the local communities. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the debate that's going to follow.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Graham. And thank you to NOCN Group for partnering with Effie Week on these webcasts. I'm hopeful now we will be joined by Jennifer Coupland, Chief Executive for the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, and by Emma Roberts, Head of Research at WorldSkills UK, and Paul Allman, Director at Flannery Plant Hire.
Hi Nick, I am here.
Good morning, Emma. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Nick. I'm here as well.
Excellent. And I think Jennifer needs a webcam switching on. So, if we may, we'll just start with some opening remarks. Perhaps in order of my screen, we'll start with you, Emma, if that's okay. As I mentioned, Emma, you're Head of Research at WorldSkills UK. Just 2 or 3 minutes, if that's all right, each of you, just to give your opening remarks with regard to, well, anything you like, really, but obviously we're here talking about the Effie white paper, and particularly around employer engagement.
Absolutely, thanks, Nick. So yeah, I mean, we are very enthusiastic about the Effie white paper. I think there's a lot of opportunity for WorldSkills UK to step in and support the sector to achieve what the government set out in terms of its objectives. On the subject of employer-led skills, sort of specifically, I think what I found really interesting reading the white paper was just thinking about sort of stepping back why employer-led skills are really important. And I think the positioning in the Secretary of State's forward really sets that out. You know, it's pretty unambiguous in saying that the skills sector needs to have a more economic role in terms of you know, our post-COVID economic recovery, and really stepping up and delivering the skills that employers need. And I think there's a lot of language in the chapter that you've just been describing about innovation, helping businesses be more productive and efficient, and that is what really struck me. And I think that's where we can, as WorldSkills UK, that's where we can play a big role. So lots of people probably tuning into the webinar today will know WorldSkills UK for our competition involvement at a national level and an international level. But what we're doing increasingly is using that expertise and using our access to international insights and best practice to act as a quality improvement partner for different bits of the sector. So working with colleges through our new Centre of Excellence, working with IfATE, and working with other partners in the sector to bring our knowledge of international standards and quality and ways of assessment to improve standards, and hopefully that will help deliver what employers really need.
Thank you, Emma. That's a really great intro. Thank you for that, Emma from WorldSkills UK. Paul, if we could come to you now. You are obviously an employer. You are on this roundtable from the employer perspective. We in the sector keep saying, oh, this isn't your main thing. You've got other things to worry about. Just tell us a bit about yourself and your opening remarks with regard to the white paper.
Okay, I think to start with a bit of background about our business. So Flannery's, we're a provider of operated equipment into the construction sector across the UK. So we have up to 1,000 workers on sites across the country at any one time. I think one of the big things we've done as a business, we got heavily involved with the development of the Trailblazer Apprenticeship. Our MD, Patrick Flannery, was the chair on that apprenticeship. So we're very focused on trying to encourage new people into the sector. Also, I'm sitting here today from the Operator Skills Hub, which is a JV between Flannery and Balfour Beatty. The idea behind this was to set up a brand new training facility to develop a centre to encourage new workers into the sector, but also to focus on technology and how we can sort of use technology, innovation, simulation, VR and AR to actually try and encourage new people in, because we've got a big challenge at the moment. We're I suppose, in terms of our sector, there's a huge amount of opportunities out there. We are one sector where we are looking for workers in a big way. We've got HS2, I'm based in Birmingham, so HS2 literally runs past the back of our premises here. We're also looking at a lot of work with Highways England and lots of other projects across the UK. So we've got a big demand for workers, and how do we get people into our sector? I think looking at the white paper, to be more specific, I think one of the challenges is the focus on employers, which is great. I think we really need to focus on what employers want. But I think going back to the point that Graham mentioned earlier, not all employers have got the time. I think looking at our sector specifically, plant hire, there's an awful lot of SMEs. There's only a small number of large companies. We probably don't engage as well as we should do in terms of actually trying to focus on how we bring new people into the sector. But I suppose all those SMEs that work in our sector, they haven't really got the time individually to engage with further education, to focus on how we can bring new people into the sector. So we recognise our responsibility, and part of my role within the business to look at how we engage with further education colleges, to actually look at traineeships, apprenticeships, how we can drive new people into our sector. But it's not happening on a wide basis across the industry, and there's a lot of work to do. So we recognise our role within this, but across the sector, we really need to look at this very closely and look at how we can make the white paper work for our sector as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Really interesting to hear your perspective, and we'll come back to Emma and Paul shortly with some questions and comments and so forth. But before we do, delighted to be joined by Jennifer Coupland. Jennifer is, of course, the Chief Executive for the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, affectionately known as the Institute, and was formerly for many years very senior civil servant within the Department for Education, leading on things such as apprenticeships and then T-levels. And briefly, I think on the STA as well, but has been and seen many things in the further education skills space, and is now leading the employer body, as I understand it, very much employer-led at the Institute. So Jennifer, over to you. This is your chapter for your opening remarks, please.
Nick, and good morning everybody. Thanks for having me along. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of how the Institute's looking at the Effie white paper, you know, like other contributors today, we were really delighted by the sort of thrust and content of it, really seeing it as a big endorsement essentially of the employer-led skills system and the work that the Institute's been doing with, you know, large groups of employers over the last 3 years to establish those apprenticeship standards, and now to kind of morph those into underpinning essentially the whole system of technical education, and making sure that that employer voice is really there in setting the expectations for standards that people will reach in the vocational and technical space. So we think that is really, really great. I think over the last few years, we've really seen the benefits of putting employers at the heart of the skills system. So they have driven changes in the makeup of the offer. So we've seen a lot of growth in higher level skills, for example, in the apprenticeship programme, and a move away from the kind of low skill, low paid apprenticeships that sort of previously dominated the programme. So you start to see how giving employers an influence moves the system into actually really starting to address those skills gaps and productivity challenges that have been dogging the skills system for such a long time. I think the other thing that we've seen over the last few years is that when you do put employers in the driving seat and you do genuinely give them a voice and you do genuinely allow them to influence, what comes out of the end of that process is a set of standards that people actually like and buy into and kind of respect. and I think you've heard that from Graham as well, in terms of the sort of perceptions of the standards that are available now for people to kind of train against. We've seen the OU survey recently saying that I think about 70% of business leaders in England thought that apprenticeships and work-based learning were going to be vital to their sort of COVID recovery. So that's all really important. And I think the involving employers much more in the system has meant that new routes to professions are opening up. So that whole kind of question of access and social mobility and giving everybody a chance, as part of that kind of levelling up agenda to access skilled work is really important. And I think it can happen as we extend out that kind of employer-led approach into technical education. But I think Graham, I tuned in just as Graham was sort of making a point about, it does need to involve others as well as employers, and I think that's absolutely right. I think the North Star, if you like, of the Institute has absolutely been and will continue to be servicing employers and having employers leading the system, but we also need to make everything deliverable, and we need to make it work for apprenticeships as well. So I think the challenge over the next few years is that sort of triangulation piece, making sure that employers are able to influence where they can and should, but making sure that the thing is really deliverable and high quality for apprentices as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate your opening remarks. Let's, for a moment, let's just focus on what I refer to as the specifics of the white paper, because my pitch is that the reason why this is a white paper is because it will require legislation to put these improvement plans, these employer-led plans on statutes, and there'll be some money to encourage particularly colleges. But if they don't do what they're told, this seems to me to be the kind of the latest solution to an age-old issue of going back decades of employer engagement. If they don't do what they're told, then the Secretary of State can use powers, on what are currently the Department for Education tell us regularly at Effie Week anyway, are autonomous institutions. So not very autonomous potentially after the legislation. Any thoughts in terms of your reading of the white paper, and then if you agree with me in terms of the significance of this, whether you think this is the solution to the perennial problem of employer engagement? Who would like to start? Jennifer?
Thanks, Nick. So I think, obviously the sort of status of the FE sector has evolved and changed over decades. It's been independent and less so at different points in its history. So there is a sort of sense of pendulums swinging a bit here. I think also that, it seems to me to be a kind of reasonable thing for a Secretary of State to expect that if they are putting so much store by what the FE sector can do and really kind of backing them to be so important in our sort of future recovery from COVID, but also addressing those, those problems that we had going into COVID around sort of productivity and social mobility and skills gaps. And there's an element of, us transitioning out of the whole kind of Brexit period as well, and how we deal with the changing relationship with other industrialized nations and migration and all of those kinds of issues. If the Secretary of State, which I think he is doing in the white paper, is backing FE as a sector to kind of really support him and help with that agenda, then I think it's reasonable that he has some sort of backstop powers to kind of do, to intervene if he thinks that things are going in a wrong direction. But I would expect that we will see a lot more detail around the local skills improvement plans and how that is going to work, who gets to be involved, who decides when there are decisions to make, and what the mechanism is for making those decisions about what provision is put on by providers locally, and how does that need to reflect the needs of industry in a particular locality. I think there's still an awful lot, whilst it was a white paper, there's still an awful lot of detail to come, I think, off the back of all of that.
Absolutely. Paul, as an employer, I mean, you're obviously heavily invested and engaged in the skills sector. You've chaired a Trailblazer group, or your company's been very heavily involved in that anyway. What are your thoughts in terms of your fellow employers? you know, how much time and energy have you invested doing that as an organisation, and how do we encourage the employers to invest that? Because that's the concern, is that maybe they won't invest it unless they feel like they've got a guaranteed return, which would be through the government forcing the colleges to do what the employers want. You know, what sort of shifting in power away from the sector institutions to the employers. What are your thoughts as a new approach?
Yeah, I think it's really important that employers are involved with it, but I think that there's I suppose previously been a lot of apathy about getting involved. I don't think there's been enough focus on the industry shaping the marketplace, and I think that's quite important. I think there's got to be a drive to do that, and as a business, we've been very focused on that. We got involved with the Trailblazer, developing the Trailblazer, which I think is a great qualification. Unfortunately, to date, there's not been a lot of take-up, but maybe COVID's had an impact on that, and hopefully going forward we will have a lot more people getting involved with it. But I think we really do need to drive within our sector, get a group of sort of organisations, the key organisations together, and really focus on how we can work closer with the FE colleges to actually develop something which is fit for purpose for what we need. I think going back to what a point that Graham made, it's not just about apprentices, it's not just about young people coming to the industry. There's an awful lot of people who need to be retrained from other sectors, from sectors which are struggling at the moment, such as retail. A lot of conversations I've had with people who are looking to join us or looking to come to the industry, the apprenticeship program doesn't suit them. They can't afford to be on an apprenticeship type wage. And to go for the length of time that they need to go through with an apprenticeship. So they need something which is more fit for purpose for them, to get them into the sector. I think one thing in our industry, to get into work, there isn't, in terms of time and in terms of training, we can put people through perhaps a 4 to 8 week sort of boot camp style program and get them into work and get them earning money, and that's a really, really good way to get into the industry. So I don't think we should get hung up so much on apprenticeships. We need to look at how we can encourage people from other sectors to come in and what suits them, but also what suits the industry as well.
It's fascinating, Paul, hearing you as a construction firm, very much in the spotlight. So boot camps are going to be in construction. They're not going to be in retail. Level 3 adult offer is available in construction. It's not available in retail. It's really interesting hearing, you know, the flexi jobs apprenticeships are going to be in construction. They're not going to be in retail. It's really interesting that we've got a bunch of reforms being introduced, arguably a little too quickly, before we've actually got the white paper in play, as described by Keith last week, saying basically there's lots of complexity right now while we kind of get our ducks in order. It's fascinating as a construction firm that you've actually highlighted retail as an important area, and yet the government, not, you know, it's not STEM, appears to be not interested. Certainly in terms of the reforms taking place, and that idea about a local plan, just how local will it really be if the government say, well, we're not interested in the locality? We had quite a few people messaging about SMEs and saying, part of, you know, in their part of the country, they're all SMEs, and how do you get engaged with those? We'll come back to you, Jennifer, because I did see that you wanted to come back in. But before we do that, Emma. So with at WorldSkills, you have to work. You do work with a lot of employers and their employees. I've had a long involvement with WorldSkills myself through FE Week and our partnership there. And my understanding, it can be quite challenging to get the colleges on board. So I imagine WorldSkills has had some similar challenges, maybe that the government feel they've been with employers working with colleges. What are your thoughts in terms of those strengthening those linkages as you've been doing yourselves at WorldSkills? Oh, Emma, I'm not sure we can hear you right now. I can't hear you, I'm afraid, Emma. Can anyone say Emma? I think we're going to have to come back to you, Emma, because I don't know why, but you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you right now, I'm afraid. So we'll come back to you in a moment, Emma. Jennifer, if we can come to you. So yeah, did you want to come in there? I saw you raise your hand while Paul was talking about the engagement from employers. You've muted yourself. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can hear you. Yep.
I didn't mute myself. I was muted by the organizer, Nick. I was just going to pick up on your point about, you know, whether the Secretary of State is going to force colleges to do what employers want. And I just think, you know, from my experience working with thousands of employers over the last few years, that would be the last thing that any employer actually want, because those kinds of approaches don't really stick in the system. So I think, you know, where you see really successful collaborations, and there are loads happening already, let's get that on the record, you know, there's really successful relationships between FE colleges and employers in their local areas, lots of really great. Where you see that happening, it's on the basis of kind of mutual understanding, mutual respect for, you know, what each party brings to the table. And I think it is complicated. You know, one of the sort of challenges that we faced in the Institute, and I know that any provider that works closely with employers in their local area will experience as well, is that there isn't a single employer voice. You know, lots of employers are willing to engage with the skill system, and they need to get out of it what they need to get out of it. And it's not necessarily the same thing across the piece, whether you're within a particular sector or whether you're an SME coming into this space, or you're a large employer. That your particular needs can be quite different. I think the real challenge is sort of charting that course between those kind of competing and often equally valid voices about what they need. And I think that kind of cycles back into trying to maintain that employer engagement, because if employers aren't seeing relatively quickly that they are having an influence and that they are getting out of the system what they think they need, then they can start to disengage, rightly so, because as we've been talking about this morning, their primary, you know, their reason for being is not to support the skills system, it's, you know, to do lots of other interesting things in the world. So I think there are challenges, and I think it's more about operating in that kind of collaborative way between employers and FE providers.
Yeah, absolutely. And who would argue against collaboration? I guess the issue with the white paper is it's a kind of, you've described it, a backstop where the collaboration doesn't happen or has failed going forward. Emma, hopefully we've got you back now. Apologies if that was on my end. Do apologise. Are you with us? Oh, no, I still cannot hear you, I'm afraid, and you're not muted on our end.
Can you hear me now?
Right. There you are. Yes, we can hear you now. Right, Emma. Hi there. So as I was just asking about experience at WorldSkills, where you are very often in the middle of the colleges and the employers and training providers, you know, bridging that relationship.
Yeah, so I mean, we enjoy really good partnerships with employers and with colleges, as you say, and training providers. And you know, so I think we can carry on being part of that system and try and facilitate, you know, these improvement plans to happen, and you know, but both at a local level and at a national level. I think what's really interesting for me is how far these improvement plans can look ahead and plan for the future. You know, if you look back to the Chancellor's budget statement last week, there's an awful lot that is going to need to be delivered over the next, you know, 3 to 5 years in terms of, you know, meeting zero carbon targets, etc., etc. And all of that has a really massive skills implication. So I think it will be really good if those improvement plans can not just look at what skills are needed for current employers in those areas, but how can they attract new employers in, and how can they, you know, use skills quality, hopefully in partnership with us as a quality improvement partner, to attract that investment and plan for future skills needs as well as what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, really interesting. And picking up on that point, Emma, a few people have been messaging around future needs, and I was kind of fairly, and I haven't changed my position on this. I worked at a college for 7-8 years. I had lots of companies trying to sell me labour market information, plenty of strategies. The local skills improvement plans were getting very excitable about pretty graphs and pretty pie charts. We had a UK CES, the commission, that would have 300-page documents with pretty pie charts and pretty graphs. 20, 30 slides in a 10-minute session of very small, pretty graphs and pretty slides. And my view was always the same, which was that it was 5-year-old data planning for courses that will finish in 5 years when the economy will probably look quite different in that very specific region of the country. How do we avoid that? Because the government is throwing literally tens of millions of pounds, as I understand it, at pretty pie charts and pretty graphs to try and second guess where we're going to need it. My view is that should be done locally, not nationally, and not based on 5-year-old data. Do they not trust the conversations locally? And what's going on there around are we going to repeat mistakes perhaps of the past? And obviously you're there as a researcher. This sort of thing must keep you up keep you awake at night.
Well, thankfully not, but yes, it's a really important question, and you know, hopefully data's improving all the time, isn't it? So hopefully, you know, we won't be repeating those mistakes because our ability to collect data and analyze data is improving all the time. I think it will, you know, depend as much on how people buy in, how different stakeholders buy into the process, as whether it's going to work, as whether the data is accurate. Because if you look at, you know, certain areas of the country, for example, those that are heavily reliant on the automotive sector, for example, which is a massive strength for our country, you know, that isn't going to change in the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to carry on being important, and having a local skills improvement plan that incorporates that for those areas will be, you know, will be vital. So I think it's probably being realistic about what they can achieve, but hopefully you know, the approach to data will have improved as well.
Yeah, hopefully we do hope that data can be it's often the way it's used, not just the availability of it. It keeps me awake at night, but it probably shouldn't, but it does. Jennifer, I wonder if we can pick up on a couple of things. So the first thing in my mind is that, you know, the Institute has quite a challenge on its hands, even representing employers alone, as it were, in the sense that not all employers agree with each other, and you've been increasingly dealing with potentially quite a bit of duplication across various standards at levels and in different sectors. And one of the things that concerns me with the white paper and these improvement plans is that we already have local plans, such as the London Skills Plan for the mayoral authority here, and 5 or 6 other mayoral authorities have their own local plans. We have quite a lot of different agencies in the form of the IfATE, Ofqual, Ofsted, OFS, in addition to the kind of the mothership in the form of the DFE, and some concerns there about duplications. Is this not? Are we at risk of employers kind of getting all a bit confused and walking away because it's just yet more duplication? How are we going to avoid that mistake of the past, do you think?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, in terms of where the Institute fits into that landscape, I don't think we duplicate anybody else's functions. So, you know, we're the organisation that works with employers to set those national standards around what constitutes competence in a particular occupation. What does an apprentice know? What skills do they need, and what behaviours do they need to exhibit in order to function effectively in that occupation? I don't think there is another organisation that's doing that. And similarly with, you know, Ofsted, you know, carrying out their inspections and Ofqual regulating qualifications. So there's, you know, it is a complicated landscape, but all those organisations have kind of unique remits. I think when you get into the sort of the more local tier, however, I think one of the things that was not entirely clear in my mind in terms of the white paper was how do the new ideas dock onto what exists already. So for example, you know, we have LEPs, and LEPs will have their own sort of plans for their local areas already. So how does the new kind of evolution of that dock together with it? And I think that's something obviously local areas will need to kind of work through and make sure that it works for their sort of local area, I think.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of detail to thrash out there, isn't there? And we can but hope that it will be fairly consultative. I was pushing Keith quite hard last week, saying you haven't done any consultation on any of this yet. You know, you're introducing boot camps, you're introducing level 3 adult offer. You know, a lot of these reforms that are kind of being piecemeal implemented at the moment, as opposed to the white paper attempting to be more strategic, has yet to have much consultation. Where there has been quite a lot of consultation, and I'm sure you'll say there's no overlap, has been on funding bands for apprenticeships. And I mention it because it is in the white paper. It gets a special mention and a commitment from the Institute. And I think funding is interesting because one would assume that would be the Education and Skills Funding Agency, but in fact, the IFA has been doing all the modelling around the bands and advising the Minister on the setting of those funding rate bands. How's that looking? When are we looking to pilot that and roll that out at the moment? If we could be specific with our months, that would be great.
I won't be specific with our months, but we're looking at the summer, and when we're going to start trialing it in parallel with the existing system, and we're going to be thinking about, okay, so how is that looking, and how does that sort of look and feel before kind of going nap on all of that. But you know, we've had at least 2 consultations on the funding band model, and I think it's been really positive that we've been able to demonstrate that we are genuinely listening to people's concerns about making sure that what we come out with when it finally hits the road is something that really does reflect the genuine delivery costs of apprenticeships. And one of the things I think that's sort of evolved from that is this question about what is and isn't eligible within the apprenticeship funding system. So as you know, the ESFA, who set the overall sort of policy, the overall kind of ambit for sort of funding within which we have our part to play in terms of making these recommendations to the Minister, have conducted their own sort of eligibility review of and are thinking about what falls either side of the line, because that has you know, through developing our very transparent approach, has become clearer about what is and what isn't eligible within the system. So that's, I think that's been a positive step on the journey.
Yeah, when do you think we might find out whether the enrolment process is fundable or not? What's the timescale on that?
So that's an ESFA decision. So I'm not certain of what their timetable is looking like at the moment, but hopefully it will be soon. And that's why we've tried to align our kind of rollout timetable to those decisions, so that we can reflect whatever those decisions are in our approach.
Okay. So last question on the funding bands. As I say, it gets a special mention in the white paper. So if I'm an apprenticeship provider now, what's the soonest I might expect a standard I'm currently delivering to see its rate go down? What's the how, you know, are you saying that could happen as soon as the summer, or that's not what's happening in the summer? Something else is happening in the summer.
No, so we're working through the detail. No, so what we will be doing is publishing further details of the approach later in the year, and we will make sure that we have some protections in there so that we don't so we don't create a scenario where there are lots of funding band movements over a sort of period of time. So there'll be a transition period before anybody sort of feels any kind of effects, particularly now, obviously, with the whole kind of COVID situation. We don't want to introduce any kind of degree of unnecessary uncertainty into the funding process.
But it could be so just to be clear, it could be as soon as the summer when an existing standard band could be reduced. If I understood that correctly.
No, so we would be looking at applying the new process in parallel to the old process from the summer. So that we can test and see how it looks in practice, so that we're learning as we're going. So sort of piloting that approach, and then using that to make any tweaks to the system that we think in practice, because what we've been doing so far is sort of modelling it, not in live time with real kind of real standards coming through. So we will have providers who want to give the option of putting themselves through the new process. It will be a voluntary thing in the first instance. People could have used that approach, and then they will obviously have, if it comes to the end of the process and they think actually that does look entirely right, they do still have the option of going and getting sort of provider quotes as we have done in the existing system.
But that's not just for the development of standards. I'm being specific about existing standards and when their rate might be reduced. just trying to be clear what the timescales are for existing standards. I'm running standard
so we're
at
working
the moment.
through,
I know what my funding band is for that standard. What's the soonest that funding band might be reduced?
We have got an existing process for route reviews and an existing process for standards visions that it's running all the time. And if we do make revisions to any individual standard that is, a significant change, then they will trigger a funding band review, and that exists now, and that will continue to exist going forward, because clearly if you change something about the training program or something about the assessment plan, it has a funding dimension to it. So that process is ongoing at the moment, and we're working our way through a whole suite of revisions and so forth. So that's how the funding process works.
Okay, all right. I was specifically referring to the new standard. But we spent the new process for setting funding bands. I'm aware that there are some in carpentry and other areas where those bands are being reduced under the current arrangements. But okay, so so wait for more things from the ESFA around what's included. Wait for more information from the IfA, and things might start to move around the summer, I think is my takeaway from that. Thank you. Paul, if I could bring you back in, if that's okay. So chambers of commerce, have you had much involvement with your local chambers? What your thinkings around the use of chambers of commerce from an already engaged employer perspective? And then I want to ask you about how we engage all the other employers who aren't engaged at all, because there's quite a lot of comments and questions around. It's all very well hearing from those that are engaged, but it's the ones that aren't that we're struggling with. Let's start with the chambers.
I think in terms of the chambers, I don't think they fit into the space, to be honest. It's obviously a different model in Germany. I think there's lots of organisations in construction generally. I'm a member, or I'm on the council of the Construction Plant Hire Association. So as a group, we focus on training and skills and looking after the sort of the interests of our members. And that's a good body to get involved with looking at standards in relation to plant operators, but there's also the Construction Industry Council and a number of other different groups across the UK who can get involved in that space. I don't really see the chambers as being maybe a good route into looking into this, or to solving these problems, shall we say, or to lead employer engagement, because I don't think they're close enough to what industry needs, particularly not in the construction sector anyway.
That's really interesting, and as I mentioned before, Effie Week talking to the Chambers of Commerce, they're not ready to chat to us on the record because they don't really know how or how they might really get involved and what it might look like. It does feel at this stage very undercooked in terms of what these employer bodies would look like, and this will be worth keeping an eye on these pilots, I guess, with the accredited chambers. One of the concerns I have looking at the arrangements are already around local enterprise partnerships are things like conflicts of interest. How do you, if you're dishing out money, either through strategic development funds, but certainly through the use of capital money, and funding for courses, how do you make sure that they're not being spent on the things that the people making the decisions aren't choosing things that benefit them personally and benefit their employer specifically? And it's always been a challenge, hasn't it, with local authorities, that they actually have their own training providers. So when they're making spending decisions, they have to be careful that they're not giving preference. I think a point to make there. I think one of the things that we've seen is that there's a good level of funding going into training people, but are they delivering skills that people need? And one of the big issues we've got within construction is making sure somebody might come out of a course which has been funded with a qualification. Does that enable them to go out on site and be safe? And one of the key issues that we're finding across construction is people are being trained, and they're being trained to a certain standard, but they haven't got experience. So going out on site, and they are risky in terms of actually operating on site. So we need to make sure that whatever we do going forward is creating sort of a workforce which is ready to go to work, rather than just having a qualification. I think that's a really important part of it. Yeah, I mean, one of the issues, one of the ways of getting employer engagement is, of course, just to pay employers. So of course we're absolutely throwing public money at the moment at employers. I mean, we've just doubled the cash incentive for existing employees that are adults doing apprenticeships to £3,000, which is a big chunk of cash. I mean, when I say existing employees, they're technically, they have to be not employed within the last 6 months. So that's probably a bit unfair, but certainly in terms of a cash incentive, that £3,000 or up to 4,000 if it's a 16 to 18-year-old is one way to encourage employers. The other way, of course, is to reduce the cash contributions. But experience seems to be that's almost, that's not a long-term persuasive strategy. It's quite a short-termist approach. Emma, I wondered if you had some thoughts around what you've seen that really motivates employers beyond just handing over big wadges of cash.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked really well with employers in terms of improving standards, and I guess one standout example would be our work with Toyota, which is over a number of years now, and they have used WorldSkills standards to improve their apprenticeship training, so that they sort of moved from being able to benchmark their workforce skills against our national competition best standards, and then against international standards, and that has made a dramatic difference to their workforce, and competition is now embedded in their training programs. So I think they would say that that's been a massive motivator for them, in addition to any sort of subsidies that they might be getting from the government, and that's something we'd like to be able to roll out further with other companies.
Yeah, and I think that was very much the thinking behind the Richard Review with regards to moving from frameworks to standards and going through another round of employers very much developing those standards, as they still do now with the Institute. Jennifer, what lessons can we learn from the role that initially the DfE and now the Institute is playing with route panels and trailblazer groups in terms of what's working, what's not working? What lessons can we learn from, as I've described it before, of kind of going from employer ownership more to an employer-led model? Obviously, the Institute is front and centre when it comes to employer designed qualifications. Going forward, yeah, pros and cons, and what can we learn from the last 4 years?
Yeah, so thanks, Nick. I think I touched on some of this in my sort of opening remarks. I think the things that are real positives in this space are that when employers do get involved, it tends to generate a program that better meets their needs and better meets what they need in terms of the kind of standards of training. And as Paul was saying earlier, we don't want to be wasting time giving people qualifications that mean that they can't then operate safely on a building site. We need to make sure that people aren't wasting their time doing these things, and they're doing high quality training and high quality classroom based courses as well. So I think that's the kind of key takeaway in terms of the positives for me, is that they can do set standards and through their influence mean that the programs that we fund better meet the needs of the economy. Challenges are more in the space of both this issue around that there isn't a single voice, and that you do have to take time to kind of navigate your way through that, and to try to build consensus and build understanding across the sector about where you want to focus your priorities. And I think the second thing, and it's come out a bit this morning, is this whole issue of the doability of it for employers, particularly small firms. Working our way through the details of technical qualifications within T-levels, it's a technical thing. There's a lot of detailed work there. So we at the Institute, we're thinking very hard as we extend our remit into the technical space about where do we really need to have employer eyes on a product? Where do we really need employers to be the decision maker? What is the unique thing that they're bringing, and where is it possible for us to de-burden them and take some of this more technical, dull, back of office kind of stuff out of the way of them, so that we're not making them sit in rooms for a day to go through things like the details of an assessment plan, when it's not their technical expertise. So we're thinking about ways that we can lean in on all of that to make it much easier for employers to engage with us and really feel like they're making a difference to the things that really matter to them, and that the technical experts are able to do the techie bits behind the scenes, you know, to the advantage of all, really.
Yeah, it must be. Well, having read many of the committee and board minutes at the institute around the technical side of things, I can see why some employers might sit there thinking, I should really be worrying about my profit and loss right now, and the technical side is for the technical people. It must be quite a challenge to maintain the engagement after the initial excitement of being invited onto a route panel or having applied to be on one, to keep that momentum going. As you have to review the standards each time, must be a monumental.
I think there's huge appetite though from our sort of route panel members to kind of get into this space, because I think they're looking at this as an opportunity to start to kind of curate their routes, if you see what I mean. So, you know, thinking about the construction sector, for example, you know, how do apprenticeships and all of the technical qualifications that exist within that route dock together, fit together? How do we make sure we've got high standards everywhere at whatever level? How do we make sure that we've got the right coverage for the sector, so that we've got products available to train people for the jobs that the industry needs? And having a route panel that's able to look across the piece, I think people are seeing that whilst there's work there to do, that's a real opportunity, and building that system is quite exciting, I think. So I think people are definitely up for it. I think the task for us now is to make sure that we do it in a way that kind of keeps people engaged and focuses them on the things that really make a difference.
Absolutely, and at a time when the employers are being encouraged to do kickstart, traineeships, T-level work placements, apprenticeships, swaps. Have I missed anything? Whatever else comes along next week.
Probably.
It's a lot for them to navigate beyond obviously the challenges of the actual occupation and sector that they're operating in. Right, we're coming to a close now, so an opportunity, just a final word from everybody, if that's okay. So we'll revert back to the original opening order. So if we could start with Emma, then Paul, then Jennifer. So just a minute, really, just closing remarks would be great. No more than a minute would be ideal. Some closing remarks. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's been a really interesting discussion, and I think what it makes me think at the end of it is that, you know, obviously there'll be challenges along the way, and there's still a lot of detail to work through. But I guess having a can-do attitude is going to help, because other countries manage to do this. You know, we're privileged in that we get to see what lots of other countries do through the WorldSkills network, and other countries have managed to have a much more strategic approach to skills development tied into their economic plans, to help businesses be more productive and efficient and innovative. So, you know, this should be a way of making this work. And, you know, we need to learn from what other countries are doing and I guess try our best.
Fantastic, Emma. And for what it's worth, I'm very jealous of your beams. How old are they? How old's the house?
Probably 17th century.
Wow, amazing. I hope you don't bang your head. I imagine the ceilings are very low. Anyway, more importantly, Paul, closing remarks from you, please.
Yeah, I think it's really good to see some of the ideas behind the white paper, and I think it's really important the link between further education, employers, and also independent training providers as well. We've got to get that link right and make sure we're getting people out of colleges which are fit to go to work and are safe to go to work. And I think that's a priority for us as a sector. We need a lot more engagement across the whole industry, really, and hopefully some of the thoughts that will come out of the white paper will lead to that carrying forward.
Thank you, Paul. And I very much like your banner. I feel I'm lacking some branding, which I'll have to speak to my colleagues about. Final closing remarks for Jennifer, as you worry about what my comment's going to be in terms of your backdrop. Jennifer, if we could have your closing remarks.
Yeah, so I think you know, we've got a really unusual set of conditions, unprecedented conditions, happening at the moment. You know, we've just exited from the EU. We've, you know, working our way out of a global pandemic. We've got a really ambitious government that wants to kind of level up across the country and really sees skills as being a really important part of that. So there's a massive set of kind of opportunities and challenges there. And I think that the sort of direction of travel, and whilst there isn't a huge amount of detail in every chapter, but the direction of travel in the FE white paper is hugely positive. So I think that the kind of onus is on us all to kind of capitalise on that and to make it happen, because we've tried, haven't we, in the past to improve the skills system on a few occasions. But I think now with everything that's going on, that, you know, the opportunity is there. We just need to kind of grasp it.
Absolutely, I would absolutely echo those myself. And my two big asks there. One is that we get better going forward now at consulting the sector. We haven't really done that, in my view, with regard to this white paper and some of the key aspects of the white paper, moving into the devil's in the detail. And then secondly is that as and when we do have a reshuffle, as and when we do get a new FE minister, as and when we do get a new education secretary, we can try and keep some of the key things that we're working to, without introducing lots of new ribbon cutting and things that the new ministers and secretary of states want to put their names to. So some consistency going forward now that we've got this white paper would be my big ask. Thank you to Emma, thank you to Paul, thank you to Jennifer. It's been a really it's been a small but very, I think, useful round table of panelists in terms of your individual perspectives, hearing from an agency at the heart of all of this, hearing from a large employer very much engaged with some strong views around what's working, what's not working, which is always an advantage when we have these strong views. I'm grateful for those, Paul. Thank you for being so candid. And fantastic to hear from WorldSkills and the researcher as well in the form of Emma, and your kind of very different type of relationship between, as it were, the employers and the colleges and the training providers, working very much on the highest level skills at an international level. So thank you to you. If you've been tuning in, now's a nice little time to leave a little comment on your way out, because then I get to see that and it cheers me up for the rest of the day, assuming you say something nice. We will look forward to sending you this video along with the slides, which I hope will prove useful. Please stay engaged in the conversation. We'll be back same time, same place next week to look at the second chapter, which, if I remember rightly, is, I don't remember because I've got to look it up, it's to do with the lifetime skills guarantee. No, it's to do with providing advanced technical and higher technical skills. There's a mouthful. So very much looking at how we're going to deliver on the level 4, the level 5, an area that Effie and Skills has very much struggled to make much headway in, not least because of the government's interference around. Is it Effie or is it HE? Who can say? Who knows? So maybe we can clear up some of that in terms of the plans this time next week. Thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully this time next week. Bye from